Dun-dun-dun. All right. Welcome back to Recharge. Dr. Shirokobrod. Dr. Cory Hough. You said that so excitedly.
I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome to our weekly fantasy football injury show where we go through some of the common injuries, keep you updated on the injuries that happened before. Centered?
I think so.
Feels better.
Better now. Yeah.
And get you prepped for the week ahead. We are preparing for a little bit past the middle of the season at this point.
Yeah, there's 17 games in the season now.
Yep.
So we just finished week 8.
Yeah.
We're right about at the halfway point.
There's been a lot of stories, and we've talked about this ourselves, that this season just felt not the same. And our point was that it's been a lot due to the preseason, where a lot of teams did not play their starters, and you could tell the first 3-4 games seemed like the preseason for a lot of teams. There were a lot of injuries.
A lot of rust coming up, shaken off.
There's
just didn't look crisp.
And a lot of statistics showing that it's been a very, really low-scoring start to football NFL season so far. And
that was not the case this week.
That was not the case this week. So if you watched last week's episode, you knew Cory and I were playing each other.
Yeah. Individually, like we each had, I think, our highest scoring week of the year.
Yes.
So looking at a silo, you saw our scores. Like, oh, well, you guys must have had a good week. But we played each other, so one of us had to win.
And it was Cory.
It was me.
We were testing back and forth, and as much as it sucks to lose, it was a lot of fun because I feel like losing like 140, you had like 140 some points. I had 120 some points. It kept going back and forth.
Yeah.
And I was losing early, and then DJ Moore had that 62-yard bomb that brought us to 50-50 at that point. You had Andrews, and he went out early, and somebody we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that was tough. Starting the week with 3 points from your tight end was not a good way to start, especially when your tight end is Mark Andrews and you're expecting at least double digits.
Yeah.
That's just what you get. It's funny, my wife, Carrie, she doesn't care about fantasy football, right? And I have no one else to talk about it to except Jean and her.
Yeah.
So all throughout the Sunday, basically, she was starting to get into it. She's like, what's your percentage of winning now? Because it was like 49 and 51 and then 60 and then 30. It was just so back and forth. It was a very fun week.
Yeah, you were smart. You picked up Deonta Foreman, and he had 3 touchdowns for you.
Yeah, that ended up being a good pickup because, I picked him up because Christian McCaffrey got traded 2 weeks ago now, I think. But then Chuba Hubbard got injured last week. So Deonta Foreman kind of stepped in and became the only back that they used, and it worked out well.
Which is something we talked about a couple weeks ago. It doesn't happen very often anymore in the NFL, right? That scenario right now with the Panthers is how it used to be. You have your one down back that plays every down, and he gets the carries. He'll have 25 to 30 carries, but that just doesn't happen. It's mostly running backs by committee at this point.
And I think the main reason I won is because my 2 running backs that were a part of committees became number 1 backs. Travis Etienne came in and had like 24 rushes himself.
Yep.
And scored almost 30 points, 25 fantasy points.
Great game.
And then same thing with Deonta Foreman. Just a fortunate week for me to have that happen.
Yeah, but that's why shows like this and understanding injuries is so important that even if you have what's seemingly a middle pack running back, all of a sudden becomes an RB1 and scores more than other more high profile running backs.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into our first segment, I guess, our Told You So segment. Last week, it's kind of an iffy Told You So section because we mentioned last week that Ezekiel Elliott will probably play. He was diagnosed with a knee contusion at the point of the episode. Later on in the week, they said that it was a MCL sprain. and he was still questionable. But we didn't know for sure if he was going to play or not. He was questionable. We did say that if Ezekiel Elliott was out, Tony Pollard would probably have, hopefully, his time to shine.
Yeah.
Boy, that was the case, wasn't it?
Yeah. And he was my RB1 that game.
Yeah. Between the two of us, we had 3 running backs that each scored 25 or more fantasy points and like 7 touchdowns between them all.
Yeah.
8 touchdowns. I don't know.
It was a wild matchup that you and I had. But with Zeke with an MCL sprain at this point, we've seen that with several players, and it is tough for running backs because that's going to alter your plant leg and pivoting.
Yeah, pivoting, lateral, moving, which Ezekiel at this stage, he's a little less shifty than Pollard anyway. He's more of a north and south runner, I would say, relative to Pollard. But so that's why I think they were hopeful maybe he was going to play this week. But good news for Tony Pollard owners. If Zeke is out at any point, I would have no question to start Tony Pollard in his place.
Yeah, and not be surprised at this point with what he's doing as well as they are, and getting towards starting the second half of the season, that if they wouldn't give him a little bit of extra time to rest up.
Yeah, I don't understand what goes on in Dallas Cowboy land.
That's fair.
Jerry Jones.
That would be the logical.
Yeah,
correct.
Jerry Jones came out, I guess, after Tony Pollard had 100 and some yards on 9 carries, something crazy efficient, and said that they're still going to ride with Zeke.
Yeah. Well, he's a big Zeke fan. He's always been.
Yeah.
He gave him a huge contract.
Sure.
But he also said that he welcomes QB controversy with Cooper Rush and Dak Prescott, and we've seen how that turned out for Cooper Rush. The point is, if you have Pollard, he's pretty much a must-play at this point. At the very least, a flex, but he's a solid RB2 at this point, if you have a true RB1.
I think maybe we should talk about what the MCL is.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people hear these terms, ACL, PCL, MCL, LCL, and I don't really know what it is.
Yeah,
but your knee has a bunch of ligaments that kind of hold things together, if you want to think of it that way. The ACL is the one that probably gets the most attention. Is it statistically the most injured out of the 4?
I think so, yeah.
Probably.
Yep.
Well, that's why it gets the most attention. Your ACL and your PCL are inside your knee joint. They kind of like, if this is the bottom of your femur, which is your thigh bone, and this is the top of your tibia, they sit kind of in the middle and they cross. So the C in ACL stands for cruciate, which is the cross. Anterior means, or A means anterior, L means ligament. So ACL, anterior cruciate ligament. You have a posterior one as well. They limit translation of the tibia relative to the femur. Then you also have the MCL and the LCL, medial and lateral. This time the C stands for collateral, not cruciate. A little bit confusing. I don't know why they came up with that, but we should have did something else, right?
They don't cross.
Yeah, they don't cross. But why keep it a C? Could have something else.
Yeah, that's true.
Medial and lateral. Basically, they connect femur to tibia on the inside, and then femur to tibia and probably fibia a little bit on the outside. So that's that. If you hear ACL, PCL, LCL, MCL, now you kind of have a little bit of reference of what's going on. They're all knee related.
Yeah, and the reason the ACL tears the most is because that ligament has a lot more range of motion to move through than the MCL and the LCL. So the medial portion and the lateral portion, those ligaments are pretty tight, and your knee doesn't move laterally a lot. But when you pivot and turn, that ACL has a lot more range to go through, which is why also you see a lot of non-contact injuries tearing the ACL, because the bottom part of your leg is stationary and the top turns on it.
I'd say if you're going to tear your MCL or your LCL, usually that's more involving contact. Getting your leg rolled
forced
into that, what we call knee valgus or varus, depending on the injury.
Yep. So there you go, a little ligament lesson of the knees. But it does make sense why that happens. And you can see a lot of running backs, they get either tackled or rolled on quite often. And the same thing with linemen. Those MCL usually go for them. So we have Pollard is a must play. Zeke is a wait and see. Even still, Zeke is probably a flex.
Even if he comes back, I mean, he historically gets the gets the goal line touches in Dallas. So you can always, I mean, you used to be able to count on that. We don't know what it'll be going forward. I would see what happens with Pollard and Zeke moving forward before you go back to playing Zeke full time.
Yeah, Pollard's been such a dynamic runner for them this year. I mean, it's been a clear.
Like I was saying, I'm pretty sure he only had like 9 to 10 carries, but he got over 100 yards.
Yeah, I think it was over 130, close to that.
Yeah,
and 3 touchdowns. He had a huge run. He was like a 50-yard run, then he broke through. So yeah, Zeke is tough to play at this point. But I think most people are probably tuning in today for one reason. And that's most likely Cooper Kupp.
Oh yeah. I mean, anytime the number one receiver in football goes down with an injury, it can be scary, especially for fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
But I guess good news. Well, this is a little interesting. We had a lot of high ankle sprains last week. This is considered a low ankle sprain.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us the difference between high and low ankle sprains?
Yeah, so it looks like again his ankle looked like it was rolled up on him, and he was slow to get up. And when he was getting up, people weren't sure whether he was just taking his time or not. But it's a typical ankle sprain. A typical ankle sprain has a ligament at the actual ankle that goes from the little bump at the bottom of your foot ankle area called the malleolus, that bump on the side of your leg at the bottom, and then there's a little ligament that runs to around where your heel is, and that's an ankle sprain. When you roll your ankle, that ligament gets either fibers of it get torn or it gets torn completely. There's a lot of basketball players that don't have that ligament at all because they rolled their ankle so many times.
Spraining the outside of your ankle more common than the inside?
Yeah, it's similar to what we were just talking about with the knee. Going inward doesn't happen very often, and there's a lot of bone contact there, so the ligaments protect, and so does the structure. But going on the outside, you have a lot more range to roll your ankle on the outside, so those ligaments get disrupted quite often.
Yeah, if somebody says they sprain their ankle, you can 9 times out of 10 it's the outside part of the ankle there.
Correct. Unless they were hit and forced into that middle portion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ankle sprains can be tough to come back to, or they can be, you're out a few days and then you start feeling back to normal. It's interesting. Sometimes even the mild injuries bruise a ton.
Yeah.
So you can see a super purple and swollen ankle, and then 3 days later they are feeling maybe not totally back to normal, but close sometimes. So
yeah,
they're hopeful that Cooper Kupp missed a big injury. They think he might maybe not even miss a week, but it's tough. I don't know if I would say Cooper Kupp at this point. He's the Rams' only offensive weapon.
Yeah.
So I think if he doesn't have an injury designation going into their next game, I think I would still play him. But don't be surprised if he's questionable or maybe a game time decision, and be prepared to pivot if you need to.
Yeah, and if the Rams were like 7-1 or 8-1 or 6-2 or something like that, I'd say they might rest them because they have enough wins. But I'm pretty sure that if he can go, they'll tape up the bejesus out of that ankle so it doesn't move a ton.
Yeah.
And get him out there, if nothing else, to be a decoy. So I think this might be a pretty good opportunity to play Allen Robinson II because he's been gradually stepping up every week. And I think with Cooper Kupp spraining his ankle, you're going to see him get some more looks.
And if you're in a deeper league like ours, I don't want to give away all my secrets, but there's been a lot of talks about Odell Beckham Jr. coming back. And if Cooper Kupp has to miss any time, he already has history with the Rams and won a Super Bowl with them last year. He was productive down the stretch, and maybe that's something they look into. If a trade doesn't happen at the trade deadline today, maybe they look into signing Odell Beckham. So,
yep. And
I believe in our league he is on waivers, or he's available.
Yep, and that's probably most leagues at this point.
That's speculative too. You don't know if he's going to sign somewhere or if he's even going to be productive. He's coming back from an ACL injury, and we've talked a lot about here. The first few games back are tough after that. So, don't go off and drop one of your top receivers for Odell Beckham. Don't do that. But if you have space on your bench, it could be an interesting ad.
Yeah. Or if you have a free IR spot, you
put him. Can he go on the IR? I don't know if he can because I don't think he has a injury designation.
I don't know. I
think he's just classified as a free agent right now. So I don't think you can put him on an IR. But if you have somebody else that got hurt going on the IR, maybe you can.
Yeah.
I don't know. Try it and see. Comment and let me know how it works.
Not sure. But it'll be an important one to keep an eye on to see how he does. But the one thing we should mention with ankle sprains, high ankle sprains, we talked about a lot, so you can go into previous shows and talk about it because it's a bit of a misnomer. A high ankle sprain doesn't have a ton to do with the actual ankle. It's more the spacing, the tissue that keeps your lower leg bones together.
Interosseous membrane.
Interosseous membrane.
Big words that I remember from doctoral school.
There you go. The interosseous membrane, like a giant net that keeps your two lower bones together. But a normal ankle sprain, those can linger, and there is a high probability of re-injury coming back too soon. So I think that's one thing they'll be very cautious about with Cooper Kupp, because the last thing they want is for him to make it worse and re-aggravate it and then miss him for longer periods of time, because the number one thing you want to keep an eye on and avoid is what's called an avulsion fracture, where that ligament doesn't tear in the middle or somewhere in between. The ligament tears a piece of the bone off at the attachment part, and that's a much longer time to heal up from, because that's essentially a fracture. So I'm sure they'll be keeping a close eye on that with Cooper Kupp.
It's a fun name to say.
Cooper Kupp. Yeah, I always have a hard time with Cooper Kupp and Cooper Rush. But
now
that we don't have to worry about Cooper Rush, because Dak is back.
Dak is back. Yeah, it's a little foreshadowing. We might talk about that later.
A couple more recent ones, at least.
Mark Andrews, I want to talk about because he was on my fantasy team and he left the game on Thursday in the second quarter. We knew last week, we talked about how he was questionable going into the game with what we were told a knee injury. And now he left the game with a shoulder injury, and the injury report for this week says shoulder and ankle, which maybe last week was more ankle related than knee. But just interesting there. They haven't come out and said that he's going to miss a bunch of time, but it is important to note that the Ravens next week will be on a bye. So,
and their next game is until Monday. So they play Thursday, they'll play till Monday.
Yeah.
So they have a longer stretch.
He does have a longer stretch to maybe come back. Mark Andrews is one that probably would try to play through something if it's minor, which it is considered minor. But I wouldn't be surprised either if they just said, hey, let's shut you down for this week. We have a bye next week. We'll come back in 3 weeks and you'll be good to go. So as a Mark Andrews fan, I need to be able to plan accordingly.
So I was watching that game, because obviously a Ravens fan, and the way he got tackled, he landed on his shoulder, and the way he landed is very consistent with an AC joint injury, which is the joint you talked about last week.
Yeah, I think Matt Ryan had that.
Yeah,
probably got sacked.
Nobody cares about Matt Ryan anymore. But yeah, it's your clavicle, your collarbone that comes together here with part of your shoulder blade, your scapula. And that makes a little joint here, which moves around there. And the way he landed looked like right on that joint. And when John Harbaugh was giving his press conference the other day, he said that thankfully it wasn't, in his words, as serious, which usually implies that it's most likely one of those joints. So the positive is that it's not serious. Him and Kelsey are pretty much the only two top tight ends in the league. There's him and Kelsey, and that's it. Right? And then everybody else. But the negative for Andrews' managers is that Isaiah likely really stepped up and carried the load, scoring a touchdown, having over, I think, 70 yards in receptions. So to your point, the Ravens don't have to really, it's not much of a stretch for them to go, well, let's rest Mark for a game, have him come back close to full strength after the bye, and let Isaiah likely play in this upcoming Monday night game.
More tough things for Mark Andrews owners, as if it's so tough to be a Mark Andrews owner. But because they don't play till Monday, if he's a game time decision, you have to make a choice. Do I roll the dice and see if he plays? Because all the other tight ends are going to start on Sunday. And if he's a game time decision and he goes out, you either have to somehow.
What are you going to do?
What am I going to do?
This is you right now.
No, I can't give away all my secrets.
Okay, so what would you recommend if you're not giving away your secrets?
I would recommend.
I'm not playing you. I don't care.
Yeah, that's true. I would recommend picking up Likely and having that way you know if Mark Andrews is out, you have a replacement to be able to put him in. If they were playing on Sunday at 1:00, like the rest of the league, maybe you could have you'd have more flexibility there. But because they play on Monday, I think Likely is probably the best scenario for you.
Yeah, he's a solid tight end. I had him early in the season because I saw him play in the preseason, and I told you.
Yeah, the talent's there.
He's going to be great, and he's only a rookie. So I think he's a good solid pickup to stash away if you have a deep bench or need a player.
It'd be cool to have the Ravens have two solid tight end weapons. Plus Lamar, you never know if he's going to take off. I think their offense could be really good if they got Andrews and Likely going like that.
Yeah. Speaking of the Ravens, a couple quick ones. Rashad Bateman is going to be put on IR with his foot injury. We still haven't gotten specific details what the foot injury is and what's going on there. So we'll see what that. But he's going to be sitting for the next 4 weeks. Anyway, and Gus Edwards had a little bit of a hyperextension.
Oh yeah.
With his leg. Again, I was watching that game, and he was starting to pick up steam, and he just kind of stumbled, landed awkwardly, hyperextended his knee.
Did we find out if it was the surgical knee or not?
It was his right knee. I don't remember if it was the surgical knee or not, but they were cautious. I saw him walk, got off the field. If it was serious, they would have gotten a card out. Again, it didn't go beyond, which is hyperextending, going beyond straight. He just landed awkwardly. So typically those are either a hamstring strain or a meniscus irritation.
And I've heard hamstring for him. That was a hamstring strain that he's questionable. So the hamstrings bend the knee. So if it gets forced into extension or straightening, sometimes those muscles can be pulled on. And that seems to be what happened to Gus Edwards. Ravens, unfortunate with their running back injuries. Well, lots of injuries, I guess. Rashad Bateman's been iffy. Mark Andrews, obviously, if he's out, but J.K. Dobbins is out for a bit.
Another 4-ish weeks.
And if Gus Edwards is out, I guess they go back to Kenyon Drake, who had a good game a couple games ago, and I think he did all right last week.
Yeah, it seemed like he's got his burst. I mean, he does look good.
Yeah.
But we're hopeful that Gus Edwards will be back. If not this week, I think it'll be a very similar story to Mark Andrews. They might say, hey, we got Kenyon Drake for a week. He's been doing great. Plug him in. I mean, you can make a case from being a solid flex at this point, especially if Gus Edwards is out.
Yeah. I guess we'll end it on some good news. I know we talked a little bit about it last week. Tua and Dak came back last week, and they both won, but they both looked like it was their first game back.
Right.
I think that's in the past now.
Yeah.
They both looked really good. Even though the Dolphins almost lost to my Lions, they only won by 4, but he threw for like 370 yards and a couple touchdowns to Jalen Waddle, ton of yards to Tyreek Hill.
Unfortunately, no touchdowns.
Yeah, Gene has Tyreek Hill, who if he would have scored one of those touchdowns, I mean, what ifs? Things could have been different. What ifs? But Tua looked great. Dak came back and looked great as well. I think he had three total touchdowns as well.
Yeah.
He was running a little bit, which is good for him too. We like the rushing upside of some quarterbacks. So
and he was hitting all his reads, because evident by hitting Gallup a couple times.
Yeah.
Which he did 0 times the previous game. But when you have Tony Pollard scoring 3 rushing touchdowns and running for 130, it opens up the passing lanes a little bit more.
Yeah. So good news for Dolphins and Cowboys fans.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's it for our Week 9 prep. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave it below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Instagram, you can comment as well, and we'll get to your fantasy football questions. Until next week, catch you again from Weekly Report and Recharge.
Da-da-da. I can sing a jingle for us.
What?
Good one.